drawing of a bright light into a tzimtzum. Bechinas mishatei shem shamayim b'tzaroi, which corresponds to what the Gemara in Bracha is called mishatei shem shamayim b'tzaroi. What's the result? The money comes pouring to you. Hainu ribui haparnosa. This represents a lot of parnosa. Vaidei haparnosa. When a tzaddik is given this, okay, so we've proven so far how the tzaddik is able to get a lot of parnosa, a lot of shef of Hashem. What does that have to do with tevuna? We said that he's the one who's going to get tevuna. What does this lot of parnosa have to do with tevuna? Rabbeinu Zal says, Vaidei haparnosa hu mitzachzeach nafshoi. The tzaddik uses this parnosa to purify and polish his nefesh. When a tzaddik eats, the eating isn't a gashmiistic eating. The eating is used to purify and heighten his neshama. Ki achilas hatzaddik hu rak bishvil haneshama. When a tzaddik eats, it's not for the sake of pleasure of the guf. He's eating to be zeicha, to be able to use the neshama. As the pasuk says, "Tzaddik oichel lesoiva nafshoi." A tzaddik eats to satiate his nefesh. So he's usvias hanefesh and satiation of the nefesh. When the neshama becomes satiated and satisfied, ze bechinas hatzachzechois shemetzachzeach neshmosoi ayidei achilosoi. This refers to this shining state. When the neshama is filled up, that's when it glows, it shines, it's beautifully polished. Bechinas, as the pasuk says, "V'hizbia betzachzechois nafshecha." So we see that the term sevia is tied into achila. When a tzaddik is able to be oichel, he has a lot of parnosa, he has a lot of achila, and achila brings a sevia. Tzaddik oichel lesoiva. Achila brings about a sevia, and we see that tzachzechois is also called a sevia. So we see that through this loads of parnosa that Hashem shines on the tzaddik, this is what brings forth this tzachzeches hanefesh, this shining of the nefesh, this purification of the tzaddik's nefesh. Va'azai kishem etzachtzeach nishmosai. When the tzaddik's neshama is purified and shining, azai hu ish tevunois. Then the tzaddik becomes an ish tevunois. Bechinas, as the pasuk says, v'nishmas shakai tevinei. A neshama that has been put through this process of shakai, of taking ruchnis elokus into tzimtzumin, thereby drawing a lot of parnosa, thereby drawing sevilla, thereby bringing about this tzatzuchos, this beautiful shine. That's the one who has tevinein. That's the one who has tevuna. Vaidezen is galin ha'etzos. When there is tevuna, there is etzos, because we said mayim amukim etza b'leivish v'ish tevuna is yidlena. It's the man of tevuna that's able to bring forth the etzos. And that's where the Amunah is able to grow from. When there is the Tikkun Ha'etza, which is brought about by a tzaddik being mamshech this ruchnius elokus l'tach tzimtzumim, that's what brings about a Tikkun for the Amunah. So that note, when we stressed many times what Rebbe Zal stressed, the fact that what's the true definition of a Rebbe Muvhak? It's not the one who taught you the most halacha, it's the one who taught you Emunah in Hashem. What's Taichi taught you in Emunah? He raised your Emunah. The question is, what gives a tzaddik the power of being able to bring about this gidul ha'emunah, this tikkun for the emunah? It's through this whole procedure. The act alone of a tzaddik gathering together a group of talmidim and teaching, shining into them Torah, that act alone of being mamshich ruchnis elokus l'tach tzimtzumim, that act is a bechin of shakai. Shakai is tzimtzum, shakai is yesod. No, now we've completed the whole cycle. We said that netzach and hoid were the mokar ha'etzah. We have the shakai, the tzaddik, the yesod, who's mitzamtzein everything. He's mitzamtzein the oyer Hashem into his talmidim, and that's what brings about a tikkun for the malchus, a tikkun for the emunah. Now everything is b'shleimus. We've taken this whole unit of netzach, hoid, yesod, malchus, and shown how they're able to function together. It's this tzaddik, this one who's mamshech ruchnis elokus l'tach tzimtzumim. He's the one who's able to draw eitzos from above him. He's yesod. He's got netzach, hoid above him. He's able to draw from them, and he's able to use the light that's coming from them to do what? To be mesakin the malchus the kedusha, to be mesakin the emunah hakdaisha. That's going to be the whole story of this Torah, showing the tikkun ha'emunah.
One, so we say that all this extra parnas that tzaddik gets, do we say that he utilizes it himself, or that he gives it out?
Both. both. The fact that it comes to him, the fact that he receives it, obviously there's a function in that. What does it do? The concept of tzaddik oichel aseva nafshoi, he is mazbia his nefesh with this roiv shefa, and he brings about a tzachtzachus to his nefesh, is shining, which brings about a tivuna, and it's that tivuna that he uses to parnosa even before he passes it on to the other people.
Is this like another aspect of what Rabbeinu mentions in that torah Samach, that to reach a certain level of Hispainus, tzaddik needs all this extra like
most definitely, exactly. Look how every single one of Rabbeinu Zal's torahs tied together. You see how Torah Samach is a pirish on this. That Rabbeinu Zal brings over there that the ones who disseminated the Ikar Torah to Bnei Israel had to be Ashirim. Moshe Rabbeinu had to be an Ashir. Why? Here you see the proof brought out a different version of the proof. Because tzaddik oichel l'sayva nafshay v'hizbia b'tzachtzachais nafshecha. That this whole procedure of being able to be mamshech ruchni selakus, in other words, v'mamshech ruchni selakus l'techt sumim, results in a raiv shefa. On the other hand, the raiv shefa, the one who gets the most shefa, is the one who's able to do this the most, to be mamshech ruchni. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi, all of these big tzaddikim had to be ones who were able to have this ashirus of kedusha in order to be zeicha to this tevuna, through which they had this nishma shakai, which was able to draw eitzos, etc., 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 etc. Now note, what about, if that's the case, why wasn't Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal rich? Why don't we find Rabbeinu Zal he was rich? The answer is baloney, he wasn't rich. There's a story in the Zohar Kodesh that Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal once told his Talmidim, you want wealth? Abracadabra, boom, mountain turn into golden dinarim. And in 1 second, he showed that this was, in other words, that he had at least that. You understand? He had incredible, he could have given wealth, that this was no problem to him. That he certainly possessed this ashiros. It's just that by certain tzaddikim, it manifested itself openly in tangible dolamim. You were able to see it. But we see that Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal certainly possessed the power of ashiros without any problem. We see that he was right. Exactly. It's told. They say about that story about Torah Samach that at that point in time, Rabbeinu Zal sent Rav Nosson Zal with somebody to go buy a group of stores in Mezhevish. If you recall, I once told it over in a shir. Somebody else.
And yes, Rabbi Baruch was sheltered him.
Right. Exactly. And Rabbeinu Zal said that he's going to live. And for that, you're going to live long, or you're going to, you're certainly going to live out the years because he said this. But we see that Rabbeinu Zal was Isaac in the singing of Ashirus in order to be mamshich his bindiness.
So you said before that Lila, that the union of dins, a person's fever rises at that time.
Right.
How does that fit though with the fact that let's say the Oisek, that Yaakov is he made Arba sweets, so in the afternoon. It would seem that Yaakov should be the evening, which would be he's not really din. He doesn't represent that.
Well, Yitzchak Avinu, you see, does. Right? It's mincha, you understand.
Right.
The answer is, I think, in Likutei in Hilchas Tfilas Mincha or Hilchas Tfilas Arvus, Rav Nosson Zal explains that whole thing about, in other words, the cycle, how it works, how mincha represents the Toikef Hadin, the super tzimtzum, and then by Mariv is when it begins easing up a little. And we sit here in this Torah that as the night proceeds, from the moment night, in other words, so that when is the worst moment of din? This is
first second of darkness.
No.
Or the last second of day.
No. When's the worst moment of din? Let's go. Huh? Which chatzais? No, chatzais of night or day?
Day.
Vayar Hashem ki voishe vayirom ki boishe shmeishe bo sheish, the 6th hour. That's the time of din. In other words, the second that the afternoon begins, that's the tchilas hatzimtzum. So this is why the pasuk says in Hosea, Hashem says, "Ve'onoichi tirgalti leEphraim." I raised Ephraim. I raised the Jews. Hashem says. The word tirgalti means like oimen, to raise. Rabbeinu Zal says, "Bechinas eitzos." The term regel is used here, which applies to eitzos. Now note, I wanted to mention this before. I forgot for a second. Note, through the tikkun of eitzos, that's what brings about a tikkun of emunah. How do we stand this? How do we understand this in terms of Kabbalah? We know that where do eitzos come from? Netzach v'hoid. That's the mokor ha'etzah. Al pi Kabbalah, the mokor of eitzos is netzach and hoid. We're going to learn more as to why, but that's the place based on the Gemara kloyos yayatzos, and the kloyos are that area of netzach and hoid. And when the Netzach and Hoid has a tikkun, automatically the Malchus has a tikkun also. Those are always tied together. The Malchus is the Emunah. The tikkun for the Emunah comes from the tikkun Ha'etzah.
Is it a source of the policy?
Yes.
The tikkun stems from Netzach, how it goes to Malchus.
Excuse me?
Is it?
Exactly. When the Eitzah, which is Bechinas Netzach V'Hoid, when that has a tikkun, automatically it's able to affect the Malchus. Because those four always operate as one unit. If you recall, we once mentioned in one of the Sifrei Kabbalah bring that you'll note the name of Hashem that represents Malchus is Aleph Daled Nun Yud. What's Mashpia to the Malchus? Netzach, Hoid, and Yesod. That trio shine into the Malchus. Because if you'll study the Rosh Tevis of Netzach, Hoid, Yesod, Nun He Yud is Bigematria Aleph Daled Nun Yud, showing that what's their function? Their function is to supply and support the Malchus Dikdusha. It's the Eitzais whose purpose it is to be making the Emunah Anafula, to help the Emunah Anafula have a tikuma, an elevation.
How can the Pgam be in Nehi? Usually the Pgam, the Chisoron is always in the Malchus.
Right.
And then once the Malchus is mistaken, automatically they shine into it.
Right.
But here it comes out that if the Eitzes come out, if the Netzach Hod is proper, then the Malchus is being built.
Exactly.
So how can it be that usually the Pgam can be only in the Malchus, that the Makabel is Chosan? Netzach Hod, the Pgam is not Magir to the Nehi.
Right.
Here, so how can the Tikkun come from the Nehi when the Pgam never reached there?
The answer is that it's not a question of a pigam in Netzach Hoid Yesod. It's a question of a ha'aloma. The eitzais have become hidden, as we're going to see in a later Torah, that the eitzais go into hiding, and you need an ish tevunos to be doile the eitzais, to draw them, to bring them out of their hiding, so as to be able to supply.
But the hiding is always mitzad Malchus, always mitzad Mekabel. From mitzad Atzmon, there's no story, only mitzad Mekabel, right?
No, not necessarily. In other words, we find a concept of pigam could be, in other words, generally we say that the pigamim affect the malchus. However, there is a concept of all these zayin tachtainim, a potential for the zayin tachtainim to become nifgam. The chesed, the klei hachesed to become nifgam. We find that term used, definitely.
Yeah, it always refers to the Malchus.
No. Okay. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'zehu bechinas brias ha'olam." Oh, sorry, we didn't finish. V'anoichi tirgalti le'Ephraim. I raised Ephraim. Tirgalti ze bechinas eitzos. Tirgalti is an union of eitzah. Miloshen regel. K'mayshikosv, as the pasuk says, ha'om asher beraglecha, the nation which is by your feet, referring to Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rashi HaKodesh says on that, ha'hilchim acharat tzoscha. When it says the people who are by your feet, it means the people who follow your advice. Because where does the advice come from? From this raglin, from this netzach hoid. Shehem, Rabbeinu Zal, and the pasuk says, "V'anoichi tergalti le'Ephraim, kochem al zroy oisav." He took them into his arms, referring to Moshe Rabbeinu. The pasuk says, "Kasher yisa ha'omen es hayonek," that the tzaddikim carry the Jews in their arms. Who does this refer to? Kochem al zroy oisav ze bechinas chusavois. That part of the pasuk represents zechusavois. Why? Because the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, are called the Zeroyos Olam. The right hand is Avram Avinu, the left hand is Yitzchak Avinu, and the trunk of the body is Yaakov Avinu. So this section called the Zeroyos refers to the Avos Hakdaishin. Shehem Zeroyos Olam. V'lo yodu ki refosim. And they didn't even know that I was the one that was curing them. Hashem says, I raised Ephraim, and I picked them up I picked them up in my arms. In other words, through the Tzaddik Moshe Rabbeinu. He raised them and he supported them and he carried them, and they didn't even know that he was the one who was curing them. He was the one who was bringing about the refuah. Ki be'emes al yidei zeh na'aseh refuah. How is the refuah brought about? Through the tergalti. The tergalti, the eitzos, is what brings about a tikkun for the zechus avos, and it's that combination that's able to bring about a refuah. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'zehu bechinas brias ha'olam." This ties into the concept of Hashem creating the world. The Gemara says that when Hashem created the world, how was the creation done? The pasuk says, "V'horetz hoisa sayu v'avayu v'choshech al pnei sahaim." First there was choshech, and then vayomer Elokim yehi or. Then Hashem said, "Let there be light." Right? The Gemara says, "Bereisha chashucha v'hodar nahira." In the beginning there was darkness, and afterwards there was light. Choshech ze bechinas hedar ha'etza. The concept of darkness represents a holding back of Eitzah, a hiddenness of the Eitzah. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, Mi ze machshich Eitzah b'milin. Which person is it who spoils advice with his words? He talks a lot, but he doesn't have any good advice, and his talking makes things worse. So we see that the word machshich over here, the word chayshich here, refers to the opposite of Eitzah, bad Eitzah. V'achar kach kishen izgale ha'eitzah shehu bechinas oimek. When the Eitzah is revealed, this Eitzah which comes from the depths, bechinas mayim amukim, the Eitzah is called these deep waters. Ze bechinas megale amuka ismini chayshich. There's a pasuk that says that Hashem reveals deep things from within the darkness. Note, the darkness represents the absence of Eitzah. From within the absence of Eitzah, Hashem brings forth Eitzah. The more that the light is revealed, light is synonymous with Eitzah. And the darkness gets pushed away. Darkness which represents the hiddenness of Eitzah, the absence of Eitzah. In other words, this goes in stages. The more that we turn up the volume on the Eitzah, the more the Eitzah is revealed, the more the Emunah is nistaking. Eitzah is synonymous with light. The more the light is turned up, the more the darkness is removed. Light represents Eitzah, darkness the absence of Eitzah. Rabbeinu Zal explains now, Ki ikar gidol ho'emunah hi bebechinas ve'emunascha baleilos. When is the main time that the Emunah is raised up, when the Emunah starts receiving its tikkun and starts filling up its full measure? It's at night. Dahainu kol ma shenidche v'hoilech chelek me'alayla, as each and every part of the night gets pushed away and passes on. In other words, as we pass on into the night, v'niskari v'loyer hayoim, and we draw closer to the light of morning, nizgadel ho'emunah b'yoser, the emunah becomes heightened more and more. The emunah, which is synonymous with the malchus, throughout the night it's getting its tikkun. Leil, going from Leil to Laila, that's one of the examples. V'chein hoileches v'nigdeles ma'at ma'at kifi ma shenidcha me'alayla v'niskar v'yoser alayoim, and so on and so forth. The malchus keeps growing and growing and advancing and progressing the more we advance into the night and get closer to the day. Ad sheba'oir hayoim oz nizgadel ho'emunah b'shleimus, until the point where we get to the full measure of the light of day, morning. That's when the emunah achieves its shleimus. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, chadoshim labikorim rabo emunasecha, that when there is this his chachus habayker, when the biker becomes new, brand new, when the biker first starts, then rabo emunasecha, then the emunah is big, it's sholem. Va'oz ba'ir hayoim hu ikar tzmichas harefua, and we know that when is the main power of refuah? Ba'ir hayoim, through the light of day. How do we know it? Nedarim. This Shabbos is Gemara. V'zor cholachem yirei shemi shemesh tzedako marpei. The Gemara learns out according to one mandamar that the koyach harefua is in the light of the sun. So we know for a fact that as the sun begins to shine, as morning begins to advance, that's when the koyach harefua starts blossoming forth.
At night, if somebody has fever at night, the fever goes up.
100%. It's brought in the Sifrei Kabbalah that's starting not just at night, afternoon. You'll notice that when a person has a bad cold or anything in the afternoon, is always a time when they start sneezing, feeling more sick. Why? Mincha is the time when the tzimtzum begins. In other words, the morning is a time of chasodim, boiker da Avraham, chesed. The minute you cross that halfway mark, halfway in the day, you're going into a concept of din. Proof is, the light is diminishing. Light diminishing is a concept of tzimtzum, din. An increase in light is a concept of chesed.
Is it right before the morning it's the darkest?
Definitely. Most
saturation, a lot of people die, more deaths take place.
Statistically. Interesting. Definitely. Okay, Rabbeinu Zal says, Va'oz ba'ir hayoim hi ikar tzmichas refuah. Then, with the light of day, that's when the main growth of the power of refuah comes forth. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, Yeshaya, oz yiboka kashachar oirecho. Then your light will shine forth like the morning star. Va'aruchoscha meheiro titzmoch. Then your refuah will grow forth very quickly. Nimtza, what do we see from here? Shal yidei V'yehi his galus ha'etza, that when there is a revelation of etza, shehi bechinas his galus ha'oyer min ha'choshech, we proved earlier that heder ha'etza is a concept of choshech, which means revelation of etza is a concept of oyer. So the more that the etza is revealed, the more that the light is revealed, Aidezen is gadel ho'emuna. That's what allows the emuna to grow forth more solidly. Vaideze ikar harafua, and that's what brings about the ikar harafua. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, Oz yiboka kashachar oirecha va'aruchas chamehera titzmach. That what brings about the refuah? An increase in light. What is an increase in light? An increase in etza. Because we showed how absence of etza is an union of choshech. Mizeh machshich etza b'milin. Bad etza is called choshech. Good etza is light. The more etza, the more light. The more light, the more refuah. Why? Because it's the etza that brings about a tikkun for the emunah. Emunah is seder zroim. That's what fixes up all the herbs and everything from which medicines come from. Then you're able to have a refuah. Now note, interestingly, in this Torah in Likutei Moharan, just as in every Torah of Likutei Moharan, you're going to find the emphasis on this Yesod. Unfortunately, this is where many Jews make a mistake, and more unfortunately, many people within Breslov, they miss a point. There's a Yesod that Rabbeinu Zal sets forth in the first Torah in Likutei Moharan, that in order to be a religious Jew, you can't have half of the religion. And note, it's the first Torah in Likutei Moharan, it's the first mitzvah in the Chumash, Pru Ravu, that you must have Zohar and Akeva. Loi toiv heyoy sodom lavadoi. A man alone, a woman alone is nothing. Rabbeinu Zal brings in the first Torah in Likutei Moharan that Torah alone is no good, because it's very difficult to get to the Oyer HaTorah, to the Oyer HaSeichel, because it's very difficult to get to. You must have Torah and Tefillah, the Ches and the Nun. Always both. Zohar and Akeva. The Zohar represents Torah, then Akeva is Tefillah. Eitza and Emunah. Emes ve'emunah chayk v'lo yavar, we say in the morning. Emes is the union of Oyer. Emes is the best type of etza that a Jew could ask for is an atzosoi emuna pulosoi emes. These two go together. The ikar etza is the one who can be mechavan to the emes, the one who can tell you the truth about what's going to happen, what to do, how to deal with the situation. And Rabbeinu Zal always shows you. He starts off by saying ho ikar hiu emuna. How is the whole gidol ho emuna? Through etza. Through what is etza? Etza seichel oyer. Either one without the other is zero. You have people who become Breslov and they latch on to his baitidus, and they're talking day and night about his baitidus, and they burn out very quickly. Why? Because they don't have the oyer, the chiyas, the nourishment. They have the emunah. His baitidus is emunah, it's malchus, but they have nothing to nourish it. So malchus alone can carry the ball for a period of time, then it dies out. It has to draw its chiyas from the 9 upper spheroids, from the oyer HaTorah, the chumash, the shulchan aruch, the gemara that a person learns. That's what feeds his hispaidus. Number one, that's what gives him ideas as to what to speak about in hispaidus. And number two, in a hidden sense, in a spiritual sense, that's what feeds the emunah, the malchus, the tefillah, the oyer HaTorah. And you're going to find this, you're not going to find a single chapter on Likutei Moharan that doesn't combine these two, where he never lets you get away with half the religion. In order to be religious, you must have both. One without the other becomes inconsistent, unbalanced. Krum. The whole site of Rabbeinu Zal was Kol Hoilam Kulei Gesher Tsar Moed. It's a Gesher Tsar. What do you need to get through a Gesher Tsar? You have to be balanced well. If there's a drop of extra weight on either side, you've finished. And that's the story with Torah and Tefillah. Torah without Tefillah is Apikoros. Acher, anyone who became an Apikoros, what was it? The Torah, the Gemara testifies that it's Sam Chaim and Sam Moves. The Torah, you're told, is nitroglycerin. It's a bomb. It can blow you up. It can destroy you. How are you metzamtzim it? Exactly. Or Meiser Ozlai Mishmaya Torah Gam Tfilasai Toyeva. We see there's so many proofs to this, and this is the Yesod of Breslov. Rabbeinu Zal said, "Who are we? Hasidim? No, Hasidim are Amaratzim. Are we Misnagdim? No, Misnagdim don't know how to daven. You know who we are? We're Hasidim and Misnagdim. We're going to pick out the good in both, and we're going to weave it together in such a beautiful combination. We don't knock either one. Either one is great. It's just they're too silly to see the mile in the other one. We're not going to miss out on that one. We're going to look for the Nekudas Taivas in everyone. The Misnagid has Torah. Why shouldn't I take it from him? What are you kidding? We're going to learn Rishonim, Achronim, Paiskim, everything. We're going to steal. We're going to get everything that we can out of them. Chasidim know how to drink a glass of whiskey with simcha, how to get simcha out of anything, out of whiskey, out of dancing, out of laughing, out of business. They know how to use everything to... We're going to get that from them, and we're going to weave together the tiferes. The tiferes is the right and the left woven together. The zohar and akeva, that's how we're going to be able to be moiled shefa. That's the whole concept of tzaddik. Tzaddik is the ochid bein shmaya v'ara. He combines shamayim and eretz, torah and tefillah, chachma and malchus. Never one without the other. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'zehu masham razal." This is what the Gemara is hinting to when the Gemara says in Shabbos. The Gemara says there's one. The Gemara says one of the Amoraim, I think it was Reb Zera, got into a very happy frame of mind and he started asking some cute questions. Now, a person learning Gemara figures he was in a happy frame. He was giggly, so he asked cute, dumb questions. When the Gemara says bod chadate, it means his head went up. Simcha is a hisroimim usamayich, and it means he went up much higher than normal. And if these are the questions that he asked then, these were obviously deeper than regular questions. The Gemara says, this is what the Gemara says, my taimo easy mizgan bareisha v'hodar imri. He asked, why is it that we always find that when there's goats and sheep moving together, it's the goats that lead and the sheep are behind? The goats are in front and the sheep are behind. This was his question. My time easy is goats, mizgan, walk, in other words, move, bereisha at the head, v'hodar, and then imri, then sheep. Why? The Gemara says, so he answered, kibriyosai shelaylam. Just as when Hashem created the world, bereisha chashucha, v'hodar nahira. When Hashem created the world, first there was darkness, then there's light. So too, when sheep and goats travel together, goats by nature are usually darker than sheep. Goats, the norm for goats is darkish, the norm for sheep is lightish. Therefore, the goats go in front. And there's a side in this. Rabbeinu Zal says, "Izi ze bechinas emuna." The term goats here represents emuna. Bechinas, because there's a pasuk which says, "Lovesh Hashem oiz his azor." Hashem cloaks himself in oiz. We see the word oiz next to his azor, and we know what is his azor. Bechinas v'hoyot tzedek ezer mosnov ve'emuna ezer chalotzov. Emuna is called an ezer. Emuna is a gartel. It's something that arum wrangles a person. How do we know it? It's a beferish pasuk in Tehillim. Ve'emunascha svivoisecha. Your emuna surrounds you. Emuna is an eagle, no end, no beginning. So we see here that the hisazor refers to emuna, and it's oiz hisazor. So oiz is also an union of emuna. So the goats, they represent emuna here. V'hodar imri. Now note, lovesh Hashem oiz his azor. That's the levush of Hashem. How do we see what is lovesh? Anybody remember a chiddush that Rabbi Zal once said about the word lovesh? Lovesh is malchus. Rabbi Yochanan korei lamani mechabdusa. What is the malchus? Emuna. That's why if you'll study Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the first letters are, one second, is it the first letters of Shema or the Yisrael? The first letters of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad are exactly bigematria lovesh. This pasuk, the word lovesh. Why? Because the Shema is emuna. That's the ikar emuna of a Jew. That's the ikar yesod of emuna. That's the levush, the malchus, the kavod, the ikar. That's the union of emuna. So we see that lovesh is emuna, oiz is emuna, his azar is emuna. So the goats here represent emuna. V'hodar imri. Then came the sheep. What does imri represent? Imri is the bechina of refuah. When the emuna comes first, if the emuna gets fixed up first, then you'll be able to have the refuah. The sheep represent the refuah. Why? Rabbeinu Zal says, bechinas, as the pasuk says, Omar Hashem urefosiv. Hashem said, and he was cured. So we see that the word Omar is a concept of refuah. Imri is a concept of refuah. V'zehu, there's another secret to this. The word Omar is Roshei Tevois Eish Mayim Ruach. The three Yisodos. We said that Ofor is Mana de Kula. Ofor is just the Keli, which is Kailal everything. The three Yisodos which actually shine forth light, Oyer, are Eish Mayim and Ruach. Shemisham HaRefuah. From them comes forth the refuah. It's when you have the easy, which is the Emunah, which is the Ofor, That's the Ofor, the Malchus. Then Vohodar Imri, and then you fix up the Eish Mayim Ruach. Now all Dalad Yisaidis inside of you are all fixed up. Everything is balanced. Everything is proper. Then the person can have a Refuah Shalema. You understand? We had explained earlier in the Torah that Ofor was Emunah, because it was Mana de Kulu. It was the Keli of everything, which is Emunah, the Malchus. So we said easy is the union of Emunah. First easy, Vohodar Imri. When the Emunah has its tikkun, then automatically the Eish Mayim Ruach fall into place, into wherever they're supposed to be, and everything is good. Hainu, Rabbeinu Zal summarizes what they were asking in the Gemara was Mipnei ma ikar harefuah al yedei emunah. Why is it that the main thing that's necessary for refuah is that the emunah should be b'shleimus? The Gemara answers, the Gemara answers, because you must place emunah in the front, and then you zeicha to refuah. This is still explaining the question. Why is it that we find you have to have emunah first and then you zeicha to refuah? Veheshiv, the reply was kibriyosei sheloilam, just as when Hashem created the world. The reply was, just as when Hashem created the world. Bereisha chashoicha v'hodar nahira. Hainu, first darkness, then light. Hainu kizehu bechinas brias ha'olam. This is the concept of creation of the world. Shebereisha chashoicha v'hodar nahira. Ki ikar gidol ha'emuna al yedei ha'etza. We said before that what's the main thing that helps raise up the emunah and be misakin the emunah? It's the etza. Shehi bechinas megala amukais mini choshech. Ki ein ho'emuna nigdeles b'shleimus rak bo'ir hayoim. When is there the rabo emunah secha? Only when there's the chadoshim labikorim, when the light starts blossoming forth, that's when the emunah achieves its shleimus. Not until then. V'alkein tzrichen lekabel harefuah rak al yedei emunah. Therefore, the only way to receive the refuah is through emunah. Ki tzmichas harefuah hi rak ba'ir hayoim. The tzmichas harefuah only comes through the light of day. Bebechinas ozi boka kashachar oirecha. Then the shachar will give forth its light. So that note, this corresponds beautifully with the whole concept of the way the Arizal explains the avodah of a Jew, or Bechlal, the way Breslov explains it, the way Rav Zal explains it on Likutei Halachos. When does a Jew's avodah begin? At night, chatzos, and from chatzos till morning, he's building up to a crescendo. When does he peak? At shachris, when he puts on the tefillin, that's the moichen b'shleimus. Throughout the night, his avodah of tikkun chatzos, and his learning at night, and his espoidus at night, that's what's being megadel the emunah, the malchus. He keeps elevating it more, expanding it more and more. Then he starts shachris, he puts on the tefillin, that's the moichen, the eitzah of kedusha, that whole power of eitzah, taking on the chachma, the new day. That's when the emunah achieves its complete shleimus. Only when it's being fed from this eitzah de kedusha. Only when you combine both of these chachma and malchus, then you have an aspect of shleimus. Then you're able to have refuah. Then the dalad yisaidis are in sequence. Everything becomes great. Now the question is, fine. Note, we're talking about Eitzah, which seems we're talking about Pella, Oida Shimchok Yasisa Pella, Keser, and we're talking about Emunah Malchus. Go start. Who's going to be the Shadchan? Who's the one who's in the middle, who can stand in the middle and be Meshadech, these two? Who's the one who's able to draw up the Eitzahs, which are going to be used to be Megadol Emunah? Rabbeinu Zal says, in order to draw up and reveal these waters that we spoke about earlier, these mayim amukim, dahainu ha'etzos, in order to draw and reveal these waters, which are these advice, lozeh tzrichin ish tevunais. For this we need a tzaddik, an ish tevunais. This is the nickname that Rabbeinu Zal gives to the tzaddik emes in this Torah. An ish tevunais, a very, very wise person. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says, mayim amukim eitzah b'leivish. There is a concept of very deep waters which are this eitzah within the heart of a person. However, v'ish tevunois yidlena. The pasuk finishes off by saying that there is an ish tevunois. There is a very, very wise man who's able to draw these waters. Water alone is nothing. If the water is way down in a pit, it can't do us any good. We need somebody who knows the art of drawing the water and being able to provide it. That's the tzaddik emes. How? By a tzaddik emes gathering together a group of people and shining into them the Oyer HaTorah, as we're going to see soon. He takes the light of Torah and places it into Kalim, into Tzimtzumim, into people's brains, number one, that's one Tzimtzum. Or he takes the light of Torah, which in his brain, it's just a light, and he brings it into words. The words themselves are another form of Tzimtzum. They are Kalim. The Oisias are Kalim, which contain the light of Hashem. By a tzaddik doing that act, that's what gives him this power of being doile these waters, these eitzos. This is why the pasuk says, "Ki goy ovad eitzos heimo ve'ein bohem tevuna," that the Yidden Rachmana litzlan were a nation who lost the advice. They rejected the advice. Why? Ve'ein bohem tevuna, because they didn't have the ish tevunos. They were lacking in this ish tevunos, therefore they had no eitzah. Ki kishe'ein tevuna atzosai avuda. When there is no tevuna, then the power of eitzah is lost. Ki hizgalas eitzah de ish tevuna kanal. The main revelation of bringing forth these eitzahs is only through this ish tevuna. Rabbeinu Zal says, who is okay? So we know we've labeled the person that we're looking for. We're looking for a person who on his resume, his title is Ish Tevunais. And we say that he's the one who's able to bring forth the eitzos, which are going to be Mesak in the Emunah. How? What talent does he have that gives him the power to be able to do this? That he's able to give forth, he's able to draw and reveal eitzos, plus to be Mesak in the Emunah. Rabbeinu Zal explains, V'ish Tevunais hu mi sheyesh lo neshama. An Ish Tevunais is a person who really possesses a neshama. Bebechinas, as the pasuk says in Iyov, V'nishmas shakai tevineim. It's the neshama of Hashem that gives them tevuna, that gives a person this quality of tevuna. So we see that for tevuna, you need a neshama. One of the ingredients that this Ish Tevunais must have is a real neshama, a nishmas shakai. V'tzorich lezakech uletzachzeach haneshama. This person has to purify his neshama. Lezakech means to purify. Letzachzeach is another word for purifying, to polish. V'zeh na'aseh al yidei shemamshich hamshochas ruchnias elokus latoich tzimtzumim. How does a person polish? How does a person purify his neshama? By drawing ruchnias elokus into constrictions, into tzimtzumim, by drawing the Oyer Ein Soif into Kalim. Shezeh Bechinas Shakai. This is the name of Hashem. Shakai is what reflects this concept. Shehu Bechinas Tzimtzum. The term Shakai is a term of Tzimtzum. Ki Shakai al Shem She'omar Lo'olamoi Dai. Why does Hashem have this name Shakai? What does this name represent about Hashem? Omar Loilamoi die. That Hashem said enough. The fact that Hashem was able to cut off at one point in time, to create and go so far and stop at a certain point, hold back at a certain point, that's what gave Hashem the title Shakai. So we see that Shakai represents an union of Tzimtzum. Kemuva b'Pirish Rashi Parshas Miketz and Bereshis Rabbah and Chagiga. V'al yidei zeh mitzachzeach haneshama. And through this quality of a tzaddik that is machnis ruchnias elokus l'tech tzimtzum, that's what cleans off, that's what polishes his neshama. V'zehu v'nishmas shakai tevinein. Shalidei b'china shakai, through a tzaddik having this attribute of shakai, shakai which means constriction, through the tzaddik being able to take something that's unconstricted and bring it into a constricted state, dahainu hamshachas ruchnias elokus l'tech tzimtzumim, ayidei zeh mitzachzeach haneshama. That's how he purifies his neshama. Va'azai hu ish tevunais, and then he becomes an ish tevunais, because we said v'nishma shakai tevinem. When a person takes his neshama and he shakais it, that's when he becomes tevina. That's how he's zeichet to tevuna. What is shakai? Tzimtzum. When a person takes his neshama, the neshama is seichel, sha neshama shebamoichi. He takes his seichel and he's mitzamtzem it. That's what gives him this power of tevuna. Now note again, look how the Seidos HaTorah give you so much. They help you understand the Likutei better. Everything begins to have a different chiyus. Shakai is tzimtzum. Cute. Okay, Shama Lalamai Dai. What's the one building in this world? There's a pasuk that says, "Hein hashamayim u'shmi hashamayim lo yechalkalucha," that the heavens cannot contain Hashem. No way. There was a place on this earth where Hashem submitted to having Himself be nistzamtzem. Where was that? The Beis Hamikdash. You'll note that Shakai is the Beis Hamikdash. What were the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash? 500 amos. I think it's the chutzir. I forget which item it is. One of the Mefarshim on the Medrash Rabbah brings this. That I think it's the chutzir of the Beis Hamikdash, something like that. That was 500 amos, and that's why you'll note that the milui of the word shakai, which means tzimtzum, the milui of shakai is bigematria 500, and this is the side of the pasuk Yoshev b'seiser elyoin b'tzeil shakai yisleinon. This Hashem who lives on high in very hidden form, He was willing to be misleinen, in other words, to reside in, to sleep over in the tzeil shakai, in the shadow of shakai. What is tzeil? A shin has a shadow. What's the shadow of shin? The yud nun. The milui is the shadow of the word. You understand? Shadow is what goes in front of the person or in back of the person. When you write out a word in its full form, in other words, the letter shin, we draw it as one letter, correct? But when we pronounce it,
Shin Yud Nun.
Shin Yud Nun, exactly. Daled, Daled Lamed Tov. Yud, Yud Vav Daled. The milui there is exactly in bigematria of 500. So that's Marames to the side of the Beis Hamikdash. That was the place on this earth where Hashem was mitzamtzem His elokus.
How can it be?
What?
The Lamed Tov of the Dalet Tov is
430. Lamed Tov is 430. Yud Nun is 60, gives us 490. And the Yud has a Vav Dalet, which is 10. We have 490, and 10 is exactly 500. It's the dimensions of one part of the Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry, I don't recall offhand whether it's the chutzner of the Beis, something about the Beis Hamikdash. Its dimensions was 500 amos exactly. And I think it's the Yefei Toyar, one of the Mefarshim on the Medrash Rabbah brings this side that this is the remez and the pasuk Yoshev b'seiser elyon b'tzeil shakai yisleinon. Now it becomes tangible to me. You tell me that shakai is tzimtzum, now I can taste it. That the place on this earth which had the tzimtzum of elokus in it was the shakai, was the milui of shakai. The Arizal brings that's also the side of the word v'yiskadash. We say yiskadal v'yiskadash shmei rabba. The word v'yiskadash, the vav is always tikkun abris. Vav is yisoid. Yisoid, we're going to see in this Torah soon that shakai stands for yisoid. Tikkun abris, the tzaddik is called shakai, the one who's mitzamtzem everything. Okay. So Vav is Yisoid. What's the remaining letters? Tov Kuf Shakai. Tov Kuf is the milui of the word Shakai. In other words, you have there you have the whole word written out. The Shin Dalet Yud and its milui, which is Tov Kuf. You understand? Okay. So now Rabbeinu Zal says, so this tzaddik who is zeichet to be mamshich ruchnius elokus l'teich tzimtzumim, he's the one who's zeichet that his neshama is given this tevuna. His neshama is given the tevuna that's needed to be mamshich eitzos. Rabbeinu Zal says now, ki al yidei hamshochas ruchnius elokus l'teich tzimtzumim, dahainu l'teich gufim. When a tzaddik is mamshich ruchnius elokus into bodies, by spreading his Torah into the bodies of other people, al yidei zeh nichbal v'nisrabe parnasasoi. This is what gives the tzaddik a double shefa from Hashem. He's given a double parnasa from Hashem. How do we see that the tzaddik has a double shefa? What food item is usually the summarization of all shefa? Lechem. What word represents tzaddik? Which person's name is synonymous with tzaddik? Yosef. Yosef is twice lechem. The word Yosef is 156. Lechem is 78. Twice lechem is bigematria Yosef, showing the concept that the tzaddik receives a shefa kfula. He receives a double shefa from Hashem. That's why on the 6th day of the week, how much mon was there? A double portion. The 6th is the Vav. Yosef is 6 times Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Vav. The Vav has a Shefa Kfula. The whole side of Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos. This Lechem Mishnah, that's the union of Tzaddik Yisoid. This twice Lechem, this Shefa Kfula. So Rabbeinu Zal says here, Ki al yedei hamshochas ruchnius elokus l'tech tzimtzumim dainot hagufim al yedei zeh nichbal v'nisrabe parnasosoi. That's how the tzaddik is zeicha to have his parnasa doubled and multiplied. Ki kishem amshich ruchnius elokus l'tech tzimtzumim dainot hagufim. When a tzaddik is zeicha to perform this act of drawing the spirit of Hashem into people, zeh bechinas bria. That's a concept where the tzaddik is creating. Why? Kina se'ato bria chadosha al yidei chibur ruchnius elokus im hakuf v'hatzimtzum sheze ikra bria. Note, you have a person, a zhlab, with meat and flesh and blood and veins and arteries. What is he? Is he a person? No way. He's behemoth. Him and the cows and the birds and all one and the same. What classifies a person as a human being? The seichel. The Arizal brings that the word Adam is 3 times Yud K. Yud K are the letters of Hashem's name that represent the Meichin, Chochma and Bina. 3 times Yud K is Bigimatria Adam, to show that what's the Iker Mensch? What's the Mensch? The Seichel. That's the Mensch. That's what distinguishes human beings from lahavdil animals. So when does a person become classified? When have I created a human being? A mother who gives birth to a child, is that a human being yet? The answer is no way. It's when the Rebbe of the child inspires the child and teaches the child Torah. He takes the guf, which the mother created, together with the father and Hashem. He takes the guf, and he's mamshich a neshama into it. That's when this item becomes a bria. Note, we have this when a child is born in a simple form. The parents, the father and mother, provide the gashmias. Hashem places in the neshama, which is the basic element of seichel. That's called a bria. When you take a guf, you take seichel, you pour the seichel into the guf, that's a bria. Now we see that when a tzaddik is mamshech ruchnius elokus l'tech tzimtzumim, when he teaches Torah, he takes a person who is missing this portion of Torah and he inserts this portion of Torah in his head. He has actually performed a new act of bria. He took a guf that was devoid of this portion of Torah and he placed inside of it this portion of Torah. That's a bria chadosha. Rabbeinu Zal says, "Va'azai tekiv kishenase eze bria." We know that whenever there is created a new creation, azai Hashem yisborach noisein parnosa tekiv. We know that whenever a new being is created, the Gemara says that when a person gets a new child, some people imagine this banana-faced generation. People hold back on having children because my budget can't hold it. They don't know that the Gemara says that each child is born with its own shefa. Hashem creates a child. He doesn't leave it to the dopey parents. Sure, he's going to leave it to the parents to provide parnasa with their ingenuity. It's Hashem who, with the child, he sends down the shefa that's needed for the child, the clothes, the food, everything, whatever. So this should never be a deterrent in a parent's brain from having children. How do I know that I'm going to be able to support the child? Who asked you? Who's supporting you? You're supporting yourself? Which person is loony enough to think that? So Rabbeinu Zal says, when there is a bria chadosha, azaya Hashem yisborach noisein parnosa teikif. Hashem gives parnosa immediately. Ki Hashem yisborach mefarnes mekarne re'emim ad beit sekinim. The Gemara says, in Avodah Zarah, Hashem provides parnosa from the biggest beings to the tiniest beings. Every single being in this world is provided for by Hashem. V'teikif sheyesh bria, as soon as there is a creation, a birth, teikif Hashem yisborach noisein parnosa. Immediately Hashem provides parnosa. Ki haneshama levad eina tzricha parnosa. Why? Note, Rabbeinu Zal explains. The question is why. Why is it that when there is a bria chadosha, Hashem provides parnosa? The answer is very simple. Was the neshama around before? Yes. Was the guf around? Yes, in the form of dirt. At the time that the neshama was up in Gan Eden and the guf was just a chunk of dirt on the ground, did the dirt need parnosa? No. Did the neshama need parnosa? No. It's only when you mix and match them and bring them together and create a human being, now this human being needs 3 meals a day, it needs clothing, it needs that. Therefore, it's only when the bria chadosh is created, that's when Hashem has to go ahead and make a hoiloda of shefa to provide that bria with its needs. Rabbeinu Zal says, "V'teikif sheyesh bria, teikif Hashem yisborach noisein parnosa." Why? Ki haneshama levad Ein tzricha parnasa. The neshama itself does not need parnasa. V'chein haguf levad ein tzorech gam kein parnasa. The guf itself, a guf without a neshama doesn't need any parnasa. V'ikar tzorech haparnasa hu rakish and ischaber haneshamim haguf. When does it become necessary to have a provision of parnasa? Only when the neshama and the guf are nischaber, they become attached. Dahainu shitufa denafsho bisra. This is what the Zohar HaKadosh calls the shituf, the uniting of the nefesh and the basar, the neshama and the guf. Oz tzrichin parnasa. That's when there becomes a need for parnasa. V'alkein, therefore, note. This tzaddik who performs this function of being mamshich ruchnis elikus into tzimtzumim, he takes gufim, he takes neshama, meaning Torah, and he brings the two together. He teaches Torah to a person. He shines a neshama into a guf. You have this song gisarain aneshamala. In other words, that's the concept of pouring in seichel. Shezeh b'chinas bria, that's the true bria. B'chinas shituf v'nafshe v'gufa. Ayidei zeh nisrabe v'nichbal parnasosai. That's how the tzaddik receives a shefa kfula. The question is, why and how is a tzaddik able to draw a double portion of shefa from Hashem? The answer is because the true definition of tzaddik is one who goes out and teaches Torah to Bnei Yisrael. He provides them, meaning he's constantly performing the act of creating new human beings by attaching, hooking up neshama to guf, Torah to a person. That's every time he does that, Hashem pours down another cup of parnasa. Who does he pour it down to? Obviously, the one who's doing the bria. That's the one who's given the shefa to provide for the bria. All the shefa comes to the tzaddik, and the tzaddik is the one who disseminates it to the rest of the world. The Tikkun Zohar says, "Mei ha'oichel yotza ma'achol." Who is the oichel? Tzaddik oichel esayv anafshay. From the tzaddik, mei ha'oichel, from the tzaddik, mei ha'oichel yotza ma'achol, comes forth all the ma'achol, all the shefa for the world. Exactly. So Rabbeinu Zal says, "Ki taketh ksheyesh bria nois Hashem yisparach parnasa kanal." Because as soon as there is a bria, Hashem provides parnasa. So this is how the tzaddik is able to draw this super amount of shefa from Hashem, and this is what enables him. This is what gifts him with this tevuna, with which he's given the power to draw forth these eitzos, with which he's given the power to cure and rectify any problems in the emunah. Now Rabbeinu Zal is going to summarize this based on a Gemara in Brachas. Rabbeinu Zal says now, this is what the Gemara says, Kol hamishatef shem shamayim betzaroi. Any person who brings together, any person who is mishatef, he takes the name of Hashem and he makes it a partner to his suffering. Whenever he's in a state of suffering, he doesn't allow himself to suffer alone. He goes and cries to Hashem and he says, Hashem, I know I'm not alone in this world. I know that any suffering that I'm having, you feel it also. The Torah testifies that whenever a Jew suffers, Hashem suffers also. So let's discuss it together, and I know that you're in a position to resolve it. Therefore, let's discuss the problem. Let me describe it to you in detail, and then Hashem will provide the Yeshua for the person. So the Gemara says there in Brachas, Kol hamishatev shem shamayim b'tzaroi. Any person who brings Hashem's name into his suffering, kaiflan loy parnasosai. The Lashon HaGemara is that they double his parnasa. Rabbeinu Zal explains now, Kol hamishatev shem shamayim b'tzaroi, dahainu shem mamshich u'mishatev ruchnis elikus l'tech tzimtzumim. Shem shamayim represents Hashem, light. Tsar is an union of tzimtzum. Tsar is also miloshin tsar, tsar meaning a narrow place. A pain is a form of tzimtzum. A person becomes constricted with pain. We don't use the term expanded with pain. Pain brings about a constriction. So Rabbeinu Zal says, so any person who is mamshich and mishatef ruchnis elikus into his tzimtzum l'chinasar azai koiflan loy parnasosai, then they double his parnasa. It's this act that brings about a ribuy of parnasa. The act of taking a lot of oil and being mitzamtzemid, that's what gives a person a lot of parnasa. Taking the shem shamayim and being mitzamtzemid into your tsar, bringing it into your narrow situation, that's what brings about this shefa kfula. Rabbeinu Zal says now, because there's a pasuk that says, now we find this in terms of money, clearly spoken about money. There's a pasuk that says, V'hoyo shakai b'tzorecho v'kesef toyafoisloch. If you will place Hashem in your tzorecho, in your narrow places, in your constriction, v'kesef toyafoisloch, then you'll have loads of money will come pouring down on you. Note, shakai is a bechinas hatzimtzum. We proved before that the term shakai is an union of shedai, enough, tzimtzum. Rabbeinu Zal says, bechinas hamshachas ruchnis elokus l'tech tzimtzumim. The term shakai represents this drawing of a bright light into a tzimtzum. Bechinas mishatev shem shamayim b'tzarei, which corresponds to what the Gemara in Bracha is called mishatev shem shamayim b'tzarei. What's the result? The money comes pouring to you. This represents a lot of parnasa. When a tzaddik is given this, okay, so we've proven so far how the tzaddik is able to get a lot of parnasa, a lot of shef of Hashem. What does that have to do with tivuna? We said that he's the one who's going to get tivuna. What does this lot of parnasa have to do with tivuna? Rabbeinu Zal says, the tzaddik uses this parnasa to purify and polish his nefesh. When a tzaddik eats, the eating isn't a gashmiistic eating. The eating is used to purify and heighten his neshama. Ki achilas hatzadik hu rak bishvil haneshama. When a tzaddik eats, it's not for the sake of pleasure of the guf. He's eating to be zeicha, to be able to use the neshama. As the pasuk says, tzaddik oichel l'soiva nafshoi. A tzaddik eats to satiate his nefesh. So usvias hanefesh and satiation of the nefesh. When the neshama becomes satiated and satisfied, ze bechinas hatzachtzachos shemetzachtzach nishmosoi ayidei achilosoi. This refers to this shining state. When the neshama is filled up, that's when it glows, it shines, it's beautifully polished. Bechinas, as the pasuk says, v'hizbia betzachtzachos nafshecha. So we see that the term sevia is tied into achila. When a tzaddik is able to be oichel, he has a lot of parnasa, he has a lot of achila, and achila brings a sevia. Tzaddik oichel l'soiva. Achila brings about a sevia, and we see that tzachtzachos is also called a sevia. V'hizbia betzachtzachos nafshecha. So we see that through this loads of parnasa that Hashem shines on the tzaddik, this is what brings forth this tzachtzachas hanefesh, this shining of the nefesh, this purification of the tzaddik's nefesh. Va'azai kishem etzachtzeach nishmosai. When the tzaddik's neshama is purified and shining, azai hu ish tevunois. Then the tzaddik becomes an ish tevunois. Bechinas, as the pasuk says, v'nishmas shakai tevinein. A neshama that has been put through this process of shakai, of taking ruchnis elokus into tzimtzumim, thereby drawing a lot of parnasa, thereby drawing sevia, thereby bringing about this tzachtzachos, this beautiful shine. That's the one who has tevinein. That's the one who has tevuna. Vaydezen is galin ha'etzos. When there is tevuna, there is etzos, because we said mayim amukim etza b'leivish v'ish tevuna is yidlena. It's the man of tevuna that's able to bring forth the etzos. And that's where the emunah is able to grow from. When there is the tikkun ha'etza, which is brought about by a tzaddik being mamshech, this ruchnis elokus l'tech tzimtzumim, that's what brings about a tikkun for the emunah. So that note, when we stress many times what Rebbe Zal stressed, the fact that what's the true definition of a Rebbe muvhak? It's not the one who taught you the most halacha, it's the one who taught you emunah in Hashem. What's Taichi taught you in emunah? He raised your emunah. The question is, what gives a tzaddik the power of being able to bring about this gidul ha'emunah, this tikkun for the emunah? It's through this whole procedure. The act alone of a tzaddik gathering together a group of talmidim and teaching, shining into them Torah, that act alone of being mamshech ruchnis elokus l'tech tzimtzumim, that act is a bechin of shakai. Shakai is tzimtzum, shakai is yisoid. No, now we've completed the whole cycle. We said that netzach and hoid were the mokar ha'etzah. We have the shakai, the tzaddik, the yisoid, who's mitzamtzein everything. He's mitzamtzein the oyer Hashem into his talmidim, and that's what brings about a tikkun for the malchus, a tikkun for the emunah. Now everything is b'shleimus. We've taken this this whole unit of Netzach Chayid Yesod Malchus and shown how they're able to function together. It's this tzaddik, this one who's Mamshech Ruchnis Elokus L'Tech Tzimtzumim, he's the one who's able to draw Eitzos from above him. He's Yesod. He's got Netzach Chayid above him. He's able to draw from them, and he's able to use the light that's coming from them to do what? To be Mesakin the Malchus the Kedusha, to be Mesakin the Emunah HaKdaisha. That's going to be the whole story of this Torah, showing the Tikkun HaEmunah.
One, so do we say that all this extra parnassus that tzaddik gets, do we say that he utilizes it himself, or that he gives it out?
Both. The fact that it comes to him, the fact that he receives it, obviously there's a function in that. What does it do? The concept of tzaddik oichel aseva nafshoi, he is mazbia his nefesh with this roiv shefa, and he brings about a tzachtzachus to his nefesh, the shining, which brings about a tevuna, and it's that tevuna that he uses to draw the eitzos to nourish the emunah. Definitely. So there is a function by his receiving the parnasa even before he passes it on to the other people.
Is this like another aspect of what Rabbeinu mentions in that torah that to reach a certain level of his mindedness, tzaddik needs all this extra like
most definitely, exactly. Look how every single one of Rabbeinu Zal's Torahs tied together. You see how Torah Samach is a pirish on this. That Rabbeinu Zal brings over there that the ones who disseminated the Ikar Torah to Bnei Israel had to be Ashirim. Moshe Rabbeinu had to be an Ashir. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Why? Here you see the proof brought out a different version of the proof. Because Tzaddik Oichel L'Seiva Nafshai V'Hizbia B'Tzachtzachais Nafshecha. That this whole procedure of being able to be Mamshech Ruchnis Elokus, in other words, the Mamshech Ruchnis Elokus L'Tech Tzimtzumim results in a Rav Shefa. On the other hand, the Rav Shefa, the one who gets the most Shefa, is the one who's able to do this the most, to be Mamshech Ruchnis. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, all of these big tzaddikim had to be ones who were able to have this ashirus of kedusha in order to be zeicha to this tevuna, through which they had this nishma shakai, which was able to draw eitzos into, etc., 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 etc. Now note, what about, if that's the case, why wasn't Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal rich? Why don't we find by Rabbeinu Zal he was rich? The answer is baloney, he wasn't rich. There's a story in the Zohar Kodesh that Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal once told his Talmidim, you want wealth? Abracadabra, boom! Mountain turned into golden dinarim, and in 1 second he showed that this was, in other words, that he had at least that. You understand? He had incredible. He could have given wealth that this was no problem to him. That he certainly possessed this ashiros. It's just that by certain tzaddikim it manifested itself openly in tangible dolarim. You were able to see it. But we see that Rabbi Shimon Yochai Zal certainly possessed the power of ashiros without any problem. We see that he was right. Exactly. It's told. They say about that story about Torah Samach, that at that point in time, Rabbeinu Zal sent Rav Nosson Zal with somebody to go buy a group of stores in Mezhevish. If you recall, I once told it over in a shir. Somebody else.
Was sheltered him.
Right, exactly. And Rabbeinu Zal said that he's going to live. And for that, you're going to live long, or you're going to, you're certainly going to live out the years. Because he said this. But we see that Rabbeinu Zal was Isaac in the singing of Ashirus in order to be mamshich his bindiness.
Something you said before that Lila, that is an union of dins, a person's fever rises at that time.
Right.
How does that fit though with the fact that, let's say, the Oisek that Yaakov is, well, he made Arba seeds, so is the afternoon. It would seem that Yaakov should be the evening, which would be, he's not really din. He doesn't represent that.
Well, Yitzchak Avinu, you see, does. Right? His mincha, you understand. Right. The answer is, I think, in Likutei Halachos, in Hilchas Tfilas Mincha, or Hilchas Tfilas Arvus, Rav Nosson Zal explains that whole thing about, in other words, the cycle, how it works. How mincha represents the toikef hadin, the super tzimtzum, and then by Mariv is when it begins easing up a little. And we said here in this Torah that as the night proceeds, from the moment night, in other words, so that when is the worst moment of din? This is
first second of darkness?
No.
Or the last second of day?
No. When's the worst moment of din? Let's go. Huh? Which chatzais? No, chatzais of night or day?
Day.
Vayar Hashem ki voishe vayirom ki boishe shmeishe bo sheish, the 6th hour. That's the time of din. In other words, the second that the afternoon begins, that's the tchilas hatzimtzum.